Hello everyone, what is up? I'm that slug from Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, joined today by Joshua Frick.
Hey!
To talk to you about the new era of Star Wars films, because we all know that Disney aren't done with the franchise just yet. The Skywalker Saga may be done and dusted, but we've known for a while now that more films are going to come in the future, whether that's Rian Johnson's trilogy that is still kind of in the ether somewhere, or the cancelled Benioff and Weiss Star Wars films, or the Kevin Feige Star Wars film that we still don't really know what's going on, but it's really confusing, isn't it?
Something's happening, Ewan. We've had all of these projects announced and then cancelled, and I don't know what's going on, but this most recent rumour seems to shine a light on the new next era of Star Wars, and it is interesting and unsurprisingly going to be controversial, I think.
Yes, it is good. So Jason Ward of Making Star Wars.net, who usually have a good track record with covering Star Wars leaks and rumours, has basically come out with a report saying that the next era of Star Wars films is going to be based around the High Republic, which is a brand new era of Star Wars, but it's going to be a prequel to the prequel, so it's set 400 years before the events, I think, of the Phantom Menace, so kind of around that time frame. Obviously, anyone who's familiar with the Old Republic stuff and Knights of the Republic will know that went thousands of years into the past, so this isn't quite on that level. It's meant to be taking place after Darth Bane has established the rule of two, which is very interesting, and also we're going to have stupid, sexy young Yoda, apparently.
That's what yeah, man, like, because in this report they were saying, obviously it's 400 years before the Skywalker Saga, which means Yoda is perhaps in his prime. He's going to be there, he's going to be shagging around, he's going to be fighting, he's going to be drinking, probably. He's in this kind of, like 20s phase, I suppose, for him there.
It will
Maybe.
be. He'll be... I can't get, this is going down a really bad dig of a rabbit hole. But anyway, in the article itself, Ward says, sources saying the next Star Wars saga is going to take place during an era called the High Republic. It sounds like the setting is 400 years before the Skywalker Saga. This new saga is set during a time that the Sith's rule of two has been established by Darth Bane, and Yoda is a Jedi, but isn't the old Jedi we know from the Skywalker Saga, which is basically what we just said. These new films will not make up a trilogy, but rather a series of films, which will be released in the same story era and interconnect. He does go on to say that Davey Weiss and David Benioff, this was the series that they were meant to spearhead, and obviously they went off to do their lucrative Netflix deal, and definitely wasn't because of that really embarrassing interview they did where they said, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, what happened there? Definitely had nothing to do with the last season of Game of Thrones at all.
Yeah, but Ward basically continues to say the method of storytelling was supposed to apply to the As Star Wars story films, but they never got the chance to interconnect the two stories that they were told with more material. So yeah, this is basically sounding like the MCU-ification of Star Wars.
Yes.
And while I'm excited about seeing a new era of Star Wars films, because even though I do like the sequel trilogy on the whole, I mean, two out of three ain't bad, but let's face it, and that is The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi for anyone who's going to have any doubts about that. The whole idea of like having a new aesthetic for Star Wars wasn't really present there. It was still very much, post the original trilogy, that the influences there are playing for all to see, whereas with the prequels, it was almost a complete clean break from what we saw with the original trilogy. So I'm excited to see what they're going to apply to that here.
Me too, and I think that's the interesting sort of thing about this whole project, is that when I saw that they were going to try to MCU-ify it, they were going to have these interconnected series, and we've been hearing a while that Disney have obviously wanted to make Star Wars like the MCU because the MCU is very, very profitable, and over the past few weeks we've heard like these tidbits coming out that they're going to build towards essentially their version of the Avengers with solo movies and different series all culminating in one major event, and that initially really scared me because for me Star Wars is an event. We've had
magic.
It is magic.
Christmas.
Every Christmas is so associated with Christmas for me, and I imagine so many other people across the world. And we've had, long waits between these sagas, and Kathleen Kennedy and everyone at Lucasfilm have said we were going to wait a good few years before the next movie franchise, whatever that may be, comes around. But I do like the idea of, if they're going to MCU-ify it, do it in an era where we don't know too much about. We haven't seen it in media all that much before, at least me as a layman Star Wars fan has not seen much of it or heard of it. It's a cool way that they can then put their own stamp on it. They can introduce new characters, they can have their own aesthetic, they can get creative and imaginative, because as much as I do like the sequel trilogy, it is very much indebted nostalgically to the original trilogy, and that is good, and that's what we needed for those movies, I think. But Star Wars as a galaxy and as a universe has so much kind of untapped potential, and even though I don't really like the prequels, I appreciate that George Lucas essentially just sort of had a kind of, the story was obviously tied to with the original movies, but when it came to the designs and everything, it was so inspired and kind of creative, and some of the best parts of those movies, I think. So if you could do that here, that is the best way, in my opinion, for them to have their MCU style brand of storytelling and releasing movies and still keep things interesting and creative.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'm not really here. I've always been, like you said, trepidatious of the idea of Star Wars being a like bi-monthly event where every few months you have another Star Wars film to go see to then leave. It just doesn't. Even though I do think the Star Wars mythos is similar to Marvel in so many ways, you know, it's just as expansive, given the amount of expanded material we've had over decades now. It's just as ambitious, it's just as creative. So there's no doubt that they could do this. It's just whether or not, you know, you want to lose the magic over a period of a few years. But anyway, you know, the idea you mentioned earlier on of the High Republic being a new thing you haven't heard of.
Yes.
That isn't just a layman thing, Josh. Literally no one has ever heard of the High Republic. They've only briefly touched on it in the new expanded canon. Obviously, everyone's familiar with the Old Republic, so this is like the bit after that, but just before the Phantom Menace. They only mentioned it, I think, in the Count Dooku novel that came out the other month, but this is all meant to tie into Project Luminous as well, which was a thing that they announced at Star Wars Celebration last year, which was meant to be what we thought initially was a tie-in between all of the different Star Wars publishing brands. So you have Del Rey, who do all the novels, which are really good. You have Marvel doing their comics currently as well, which are also really good, and also IDW on top of that. But this whole rumor currently going at the moment is that the Project Luminous stuff, which is going to be about the Jedi and all these different characters in the unknown reaches of the galaxy exploring the origins of the Force, apparently that could be set during the High Republic era as well. So this very much seems as though this is going to be Lucasfilm putting their own stamp on this brand new kind of, I guess, yeah, the way they're thinking about it, if you're going to MCUify Star Wars, it's best to do it with a clean break and make sure that it's your own thing.
I mean, it's interesting that, like you said, they are sort of, you know, synergizing all these disparate elements of like the Star Wars universe across different mediums. And for me, that's an interesting part of how they're kicking this off, because I saw in the report that they are apparently kicking off this era or this project with a video game rather than a movie, which we're going to cover over on Whatculture Gaming. But that is also an interesting way to kind of put your first foot forward. Like you said, the High Republic has been mentioned here and there in kind of, you know, books and stuff. But to get our first taste of that in a video game and not a movie, I wonder how that affects people's kind of perception. And that does sort of, you know, it makes strides in synergizing these kind of like the transmedia element of it, because although Star Wars has always existed separate from the movies in other different avenues, I feel like this is a real effort to synergize all them and get people like me who never really was into like the expanded universe stuff or even the transmedia stuff to get involved in that, because it's going to have an impact on the story of the world, and you're going to find out more about this era because it's all so connected and new.
Yeah, it's emblematic of Disney's new approach, isn't it? You've got Disney Plus, all the shows tying into the MCU, you've got stuff tying into Star Wars now as well, so I think that's interesting. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is why they've gone for the High Republic and not the Old Republic, because with the Mandalorian stuff going on at the moment, there's been a wave of Star Wars media that has really lent in on the origins of the universe. The Mandalorian as a show is actually, you know, it's set after Return of the Jedi, it's set before The Force Awakens, but it does touch on all the kind of mythical connotations of the history of Mandalore as an empire back during the Old Republic, back when they were feuding with the Jedi. The whole Darksaber element is touched upon as well, so it has been alluded to. I'm curious to see how Disney fashioned this new era. Are we going to just make it so that the Old Republic stuff we're more familiar with took place during the High Republic?
Yeah.
How recent is this going to be? I'm really fascinated by it. I mean, the report here mentions that it's set after Darth Bane establishes the Ruler 2, and anyone familiar with the Knights of the Old Republic games will know that kind of came about because of some malarkey from Revan and Malak and all that. So I'm really curious to see how this all comes together and whether or not the High Republic could eventually feed into something like Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when it comes to these movies, when the Game of Thrones guys, because I always mix their name up, so I'm just going to call
David Benioff and D.B.
That's
Weiss.
it. Thank you.
I've never even seen Game of Thrones, and I know this.
I always mix up the first names, but what I was going to say was we all assumed that was going to be an Old Republic sort of series, and I think everyone kind of just assumed that whatever Star Wars does next, part of it will be set in the Old Republic, and it's not that can't happen now, but the fact that they've perhaps replaced that with the New Republic, that might take ideas from what we know from that era, but to kind of do it new is, to me, a little bit more fascinating just because they have more freedom. And I know, like, Star Wars fans love that these worlds are already defined, they love seeing them across different mediums, but for me, that can sometimes be a hindrance, like we have seen in the sequel trilogy, which in parts definitely did rely too heavily, in my opinion, on nostalgia and, you know, kind of fan service and stuff like that. Whereas if you have more of a clean break, you still can take influences from things that people know and love, and you can reconfigure them, but also it gives the creators, you know, their own freedom to kind of take Star Wars in a new direction without all that baggage, perhaps.
Yes. I'm curious as well. I hope this means that Rian Johnson's trilogy is still going ahead as well.
Me
Like,
too.
I have no idea what's going on with that. He's kind of remained not tight-lipped on it, but he's kind of just, it's been kind of, go on.
Do we assume, sorry, I was going to say that, we don't know what's going on with Rian Johnson's, but do we assume that this is the series, or at least the first movie that Kevin Feige will be involved in, considering its similarities to the
Yes,
MCU?
I was going to say that after. Yeah, I think Kevin Feige, if he's been brought on to do just one Star Wars film, I would assume that maybe it's because, you know, Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm had the designs for an MCU-ification of Star Wars for a long time, and, you know, Feige is the architect of the most successful movie franchise in history, so that makes sense that you'd want to bring him in for this sort of thing. I'm curious to see how the interconnected elements all add up. Part of the joy of the MCU back when it was starting out was when you were a proper dork like me and you would notice, oh, there's Nick Fury there, that's tying in. Whereas if you're introducing brand new Star Wars characters, the teasers there aren't going to necessarily land as well, I don't think.
That's it. It's sort of like a kind of a final point, I guess. The MCU, like you said, worked for dogs like us who already knew about those characters, like even tangentially, and even a tease of them coming together in a big movie was super exciting. But I imagine, considering how big the MCU is now, there must have been millions of people who had no prior investment with those people, and it still landed. So that makes me more, you know, hopeful that they could do it in Star Wars with new characters that we probably haven't heard of, but will hopefully grow to love.
Yeah, please let us know what you think of the High Republic rumors down in the comments below. Are you game for the prequels, or would you rather they were doing something different? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com for more news, lists, and articles like this every day. You will follow me on Twitter at YouRunesThings. You can follow Josh U Frick here at
Josh Broom with 2 O's. I'm gonna have to change my profile picture now to Babu Frick and do the noise all the time, apparently.
and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye. Hey!